In the year 2020, a red panda and a talking sandwich began a podcast called Chatsunami. As the podcast grew, they began attracting the attention of the dreaded podcast bots.
Now, in 2022, beginning their third season, they must make their way through all of the Terminator films. Wait, even Genesis?
Yes, even Genesis.
Oh man. Well, at least it's no Birdemic.
Welcome to Chatsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Chatsunami. I'm Chatsunami and joining me for the second episode of Terminator Month.
Hello. It's good to be back. I really enjoyed last episode. And
Adam, what are you doing?
Sorry, I was just
No,
saying,
what are you doing, Adam?
I was just saying hello.
What, you're just cutting in front of me, in front of this podcast. Do you call yourself a professional?
No, I wasn't trying to cut in front.
No,
sorry.
oh, good for you, not cutting in front of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sassy. I was just trying to.
You know what, Adam? We are done professionally after this. We are absolutely done professionally.
Sasu, come on, man.
No, we're done. That's it. I'm going out the door now. I'm going out.
Oh, I was only saying hi.
He'll be back.
Hold on, I'm looking at the Red Panda lawyer. Right, okay, that reference is very dated. So yeah, we've got the go-ahead.
I'm sure Christian Bale can laugh about it now.
Did he not put out an apology right after to be like, sorry, please hire me?
His apology is great because it starts with, "This has been a terrible week for me."
I started Salvation. So, yeah, as you might have heard in the background, we have another very special guest who has travelled all this way to help us against the fight against the podcast bots. It is none other than the one and only Greenshield. Greenshield, welcome to the fight.
Talk to the hand. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be able to talk on Terminator Month this time. Unfortunately, I was chosen for 3 and 4, so we'll get my views on those films. Better than later on in the series, so yeah, excited to chat about it.
I mean, to be fair, these are your favourite films in the franchise.
Oh, not just the franchise, just in general. These are the best movies ever made. It is very surprising to me that it's not received as well. Like, I had a look and I was expecting Oscar nominations, Golden Globes, but like 33% of Rotten Tomatoes, that just seems unfair.
Absolutely. These are underrated gems, said no one ever.
Indie classics.
Indie classics, yeah, for all the wrong reasons. Cult classics, if you will. As you might have twigged on by the fact we had our Christian Bale freak out, and yeah, honestly, we are going to be talking about Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Why it had to have that subtitle, I don't know, but then we are also going to be talking about Terminator Salvation, which I feel old because I can't believe that these films came out in, is it right to say 2003 for Terminator 3, and 2009 was definitely Terminator Salvation?
That is correct. Yep, that's correct for both of them, so yeah.
Yeah.
Way to feel old.
In fairness, there is also a subtitle to Terminator 2. It's Judgment Day, so Terminator 3 wasn't the first one to a subtitle to its movie name.
You've missed your chance to be in the last episode. Where's your time travel machine?
I'm trying to slide into a chat about like Terminator 1 and 2. Like, here's my views on this. I hope you guys said this.
No, the next episode's the reboots. No. Yeah, we're going to be talking about these rather, how to put it, very, not underrated, probably middling films, because we all know that Genesis and Dark Fate, which is ones we're going to be talking about next week, they weren't really well received, but I'm quite curious to hear what your experiences with these films were before we dive in and cast our own Judgment Day on this, because I always remember watching, like I said this in the last episode, I remember watching the second Terminator film on TV. I knew the Terminator was like a popular franchise in the 80s, but I never really had much experience with it. And then I ended up, for some reason, I had Terminator 3 on DVD. And then I never really watched Salvation up until probably the last couple of years, because I heard about the freak out and, how bad it was for the franchise. But going to you first, Adam, being the resident Terminator expert, what was your experiences with these films?
So I saw both these films in cinema when they released. Probably between 2003 and 2009 was probably the peak of my love of the whole kind of Terminator franchise. Like, don't get me wrong, I still love Terminator 1, Terminator 2, but I'm not as devoted to the whole franchise as I was between those 2 years. Because, as I said in the last episode, I remember seeing trailers for Terminator 3 and being very interested by it. And, like, I mentioned it to my mum, who was and is a big fan of the first 2 films. And so she showed me both of those films just before we went to see Terminator 3. Went to see Terminator 3. Like, I loved it. I was absolutely in love with the Terminator franchise. I played a lot of the games that came out in the years afterwards, also in the run up to Salvation. I remember reading lots about Terminator Salvation, about hearing like about its story, about the cast, about what was going to happen, and getting really excited and really enthused for it. And yeah, and then I went off to see it. Must have been the first couple of weeks it released. So this really was like a very, so I was really into the whole franchise during these years.
And what about you, Greenshield? Were you the same when these films came out? Did you have a positive relationship with these films, or?
Yeah, I had a very positive kind of impression of, to be honest, of both these films when they initially came out. I mean, I was very young when Terminator 3 came out. It was 2003, so I would have been just turning 8. And so I didn't see it at the cinema, but I did see it in the preceding years on syndication, on TV. And so I'd seen Terminator 2 and then Terminator 3. There's a very good chance I watched 3 and then 2. And then I saw Salvation at the cinema, which is the first and only Terminator film that I've seen at the cinema. And then I went back and watched Terminator 1 many years later. Because Terminator 1 was an 18 in the UK, I wasn't old enough to watch it for a long time. Whereas all the other preceding films were lesser ratings, which is such a bizarre kind of thing to me, that like the opening movie is rated like more graphic than the preceding films, but it's not uncommon. But yeah, I'd watched Terminator 3 on TV, had enjoyed it, preferred Terminator 2 when I saw that, but was still pretty hyped to go see Terminator Salvation at the cinema, and was pretty happy with it when I saw it. I didn't have much context from not having seen the first film. I didn't know who Kyle Reese was. Yeah, I enjoyed it at the time. Going back now, it's a little bit different, but at the time, yeah, it was a good experience. How about yourself, Tatsu?
I watched these films at the time, and at least for Terminator 3, because as I said, I didn't watch Terminator Salvation until much later. I can't actually remember what year it was, but that's kind of ironic because Terminator timelines are all iffy. But for Terminator 3, I actually do remember having this in DVD. I remember watching it quite a lot. I remember liking it well enough at the time, but I don't really have any memories of saying, oh, this is fantastic, because you know what it's like when you're younger. You have all these flashing lights and everything, and oh, look, it's a cool robot fighting another cool robot. But when you get older and you start to really think about Terminator 3, you think, this is maybe not as good. And I'm going to be honest, Terminator 3 for me is probably the most depressing in the entire franchise. When I was younger, I genuinely considered this to be the most depressing, and kind of slight spoilers here, but we are going to be talking about spoilers for these 2 films. But yeah, the fact that it ends with a very strong ending, and they really commit to that ending, and you come away from it and you're like, okay. It's like, it's not the upbeat humanity versus machine story. Terminator 1 and 2 have like really dark moments. They have very serious aspects, but yeah, like for Terminator 3, it's like they kind of just say, nah, the other 2 films aren't, not that they aren't canon, but it's like they almost don't matter. And I know that's kind of a thing that Salvation, Genesis, and especially Dark Fate pick up on like much later to try and reignite that spark. But yeah, to me, this was quite a depressing film. But see, without any further ado, will we just jump into this and discuss what we like about these films, what we don't like about them, and have our very own Chatsu freakout about these movies?
Let's go for it.
Let's do it.
So we will be right back. We just need to move to maybe a safer location, but then again, I don't think the podcast bots are going to come for us if we're talking about Terminator Salvation. I think we're going to be safe. Hold on tight, listen to these transmissions, and we will be right back.
We'll be back.
Welcome to Chatsunami, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsunami, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that's sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe.
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
Join me, Slade, and my two co-hosts,
Joey
and Tim,
over at the Video Game Club, where once every 2 weeks we review a video game, not too dissimilar to a book club.
podcast.
You can you can find us at the Video Game Club on all good podcast providers and some sketchy ones as well.
For Terminator 3, this is a bit of a weird one. Adam, do you mind if I explain what happens in this film? Because I know you really want to take up Terminator Salvation.
I am happy for you to take the baton here and lead, as long as you pass it over to me for Salvation.
Are you okay with that, Greenshield?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I know, your heart was set on it, but... yeah, no, sorry, that's for Salvation. Terminator 3 is basically what would happen if you hated Terminator 1 and 2 and said, yeah, I didn't like the happy upbeat ending. I want to be as depressing as possible. Terminator 3 follows an adult John Connor living quite a mundane life off the grid, and he is doing his best to keep a low profile because he still has this nagging feeling that despite stopping Judgment Day, something's going to happen, and rightfully so. Eventually, we are introduced to the next bigger and badder Terminator, the TX, who is a female model of the Terminator line. Say in all honesty, say at this rate, Skynet is turning into Hasbro with the amount of like Terminators they're churning out here. It almost feels as if they're just like, okay, the T800 didn't work. Let's go for the T1000. T1000 didn't work. So we're going to go for this TX model, which is it's described as a Terminator. So it kills humans easily, but then it also kills other Terminators, supposedly, because it's got a big flamethrower. But we'll get onto that. The whole film revolves around John and Kate Brewster. They are trying to both escape from the TX and try to prevent Judgment Day. Doesn't really work that way. And throughout the film, it is just like the usual cat and mouse chase. They're trying to stop this apocalyptic event, and no, that isn't a euphemism for this film. Yeah, that's as brief as I can be without going into massive spoilers, but I'm going to be honest, this film is probably, to me, and I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about this, but this film to me kind of solidified that this was going to be a franchise. Even the intro is so bland and boring. What I thought was quite interesting is they have Arnold's name, as the Terminator before the title Terminator 3, but they don't even have Nick Stahl, who plays John Connor. They don't have his name before. They don't have any of the other actors before the title screen. They just have that name. They have the title Terminator 3 against a black screen, and then they have the whole monologue about, yeah, humanity's doomed, blah, blah, blah. It's very generic, and you kind of think, oh my god, this is going to be one of those films. But Greenshield, passing it on to you, what were your first impressions of the intro, especially in comparison to like Terminator 1 and 2?
I mean, I can understand why Arnie's name is there and not anyone else's, because I mean he's the consistent kind of factor, and he's who people know as the Terminator. So I can understand why they would do that, because that's why you're coming to see a Terminator film to see Arnie, and that is one of the big things. We'll get to it later on when we talk about Salvation, but one of the big things about Salvation is the lack of Arnie for a Terminator film, when like that is really why you're there to watch the movie. You want to see the sort of cheesy Arnie kind of lines and that kind of stuff. And so I can understand personally why they would bring Schwarzenegger as like the main kind of focus of the movie. Going on to the monologue there by John Connor, I didn't really pay much attention to it, to be honest. It just kind of felt like one of those kind of boring kind of introductions to it all. Like I knew what was going on, so it didn't really seem necessary to do that. But like, I guess he's trying to set the scene so we understand. I don't think the others had a monologue to begin with. That could be
Terminator 2 did.
Terminator 2 did, yeah, that's right. Okay. Just to give you some context as well for my watching, I had actually, before Chatsunami had asked me to come on and do this, I had just watched Terminator 1, not for the first time, but for the first time in quite a while. And it was actually the first time that my partner had seen any of the Terminator films. She was kind of in and out, so she didn't see the entire thing, but what she saw, she enjoyed. And so after that, Chatsunami had asked for me to join in, so I then watched Terminator 2 so that my partner could watch that as well. She watched most of it, fell asleep during some of it, but enjoyed that, and so was down to watch the third one. And so we kind of got the kind of context to understand like how the series kind of progressed. And so you do get to see a big difference between each of the movies and the tone of the movie, how the series is progressing. And like I kind of just noticed just generally that what this movie is doing, and I don't want to kind of jump into it too soon before, like as an overall thought, but it seems to be trying to replicate the kind of cheesy 90s or late 80s action kind of quips and scenes and whatnot, but like dialed up. It's almost like a parody of itself, and it feels quite self-aware, which I feel is kind of the death of a franchise when that happens. So it certainly became like it dialed the cheesiness and the self-awareness up in like the introductory kind of scenes of the movie, with like looks to the camera and like glancing over and seeing like a sign, like signs, and reading out like amusing signs, that kind of stuff. But yeah, regarding sort of the title sequence and the monologue, what were your thoughts, Adam?
I think it's only natural that this was going to happen. A third film was going to happen just because Terminator 2 made stupid amounts of money for the studio and everybody who was involved. So I think it was only natural they were going to try and desperately keep this franchise going, even though you could argue it's quite a natural. Terminator 2 is quite a natural end. But apparently as well, like James Cameron had been writing a potential script for a third Terminator film in the years after Terminator 2, but then he became involved in Titanic, and that turned out to be, pardon the pun, a Titanic effort in both like production and filming and then post-production. So I think he seemed to kind of lose interest in doing any kind of further Terminator films in the years after that. But you know, it seems like the rights were then sold to different film studios and different groups of people who tried desperately to get Cameron back on board, but he just wasn't interested. And it seems like a lot of the cast as well, like Linda Hamilton had no real interest in going back to this. Linda Hamilton, who played Sarah Connor in Terminator 1 and 2, she had no interest in going back to the Terminator franchise. And it looks like Arnie was very reluctant as well, until they paid him an exorbitant amount of money to go back. I think he spoke to James Cameron, and James Cameron told Arnie to just take the money and do it, because it was such a ridiculous fee they were offering to pay for him. So it kind of makes sense. And you know, maybe it was like studio, you know, cynical studio executives looking for money, but at the end of the day, like I think there was still a bit of room there, as much as it kind of had Terminator 2 in a natural ending. I do think there was some scope to do more with this franchise. Regarding the actual start of Terminator 3 itself, totally agree with what Greenshield is saying. Like, the reason Arnie's name is right at the front is, number one, because of the exorbitant amount of money they were paying him, and then number two as well, because if you're not maybe as deeply involved in the fan of the franchise as others, like, you'd come to see Arnie because he was still a very big star at this time. He probably was a little bit on the decline. He obviously probably wasn't the box office draw he was in like the 80s and 90s, but he was still a giant star. Kind of makes sense to like promote the fact that he was on there. That's why his face, I think, is still the cover art for this film. It's not the best. I don't think the first probably 15 to 20 minutes of this film were great, to be honest. I think for me, it picks up after like in the 20-minute mark. I think it's a little bit kind of ponderous in the beginning, but I think the opening bits of the film do kind of okay in showing that like John Connor is this person who's just adrift and kind of like just floating, like with no direction anymore after like the events of Terminator 2, and it was going to be he had this grand destiny to fulfill, but it looks like now, you know, he's got nowhere to go and he's no direction. And I think they originally planned to really lean into that. Like there's a scene early on where he's sitting like over a bridge and like he drops a beer bottle into the water, and that's when it then cuts into like the kind of future timeline. But I think originally they were going to really like imply that he was considering committing suicide at that point. So I think they were going to lean into a very dark telling of this, but they decided to pull back from that. So it does what it does the first 15-20 minutes. It kind of sets the stage. You know, we see there's two Terminators that come back. John Connor's kind of aimless. We get introduced to Catherine Brewster, but I agree, it's nothing special, to be honest. It's nothing to really write about, but I think for me anyway, I think it picks up kind of after that 20-minute mark.
Can I just say that is the weirdest advertisement for Budweiser?
Are you depressed about your life?
Yeah, I also know that because they were very deliberate about showing the label. I'm like, okay, so Budweiser. I did know. I was like, Budweiser has sponsored this movie because they're very clearly advertising it. But like, it is like, if I was Budweiser, I'd be like, wait, you've shoehorned in our product at what point in the movie?
Because I mean, don't get me wrong, advertising in this series isn't new. Because I know in T2, I think Pepsi was one of the big ones when they're in like the arcade and everything. So it's not a new thing, but at the same time, I totally agree with you guys. It is just like such a weird scene to be like Budweiser, because when your life goes downhill, you've got Budweiser, you know. And yet, like it sinks into like the sea of skulls. Is like very avant-garde. Do you know what it reminds me of? And this is my first Simpsons reference. It's like, you know that episode for Mr. Plow where Homer gets like a very artistic director to do his advert for his snow ploughing business, and it makes no sense whatsoever. And he turns around to his family and he's like, "Did you like it?" And they're all just like, "What was that?" Yeah, it just feels as if it is just like, what? Why? But going off on that, we are introduced to a new model of Terminator, which is, as I said in the intro, known as the TX. This time it is a female model. Again, I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say about this, because in the last episode I made a potentially hot point about how Terminator 2 seems to be the, no pun intended, the genesis of what the other films would become. And what I mean by that is the fact that in T2 we had the T1000, which was a far superior Terminator. It could, shift into different people. It could change its arms into like knives and blades and things like that. It was a very interesting take at the time, but the further the films went on, the further they made the new Terminators really crazy with their abilities. I feel as if in T3 they definitely show that, because it could have been interesting. It could have been really interesting having like a female Terminator and seeing what they could do with that. But I don't want to go as far as to say they objectified her, but they weren't far off.
So what I assume happened in Skynet was they were like, we've sent 2 male robots back. Robot HR is on our ass. We need to have a diversity robot hire. We got to have a woman robot go back now. And so they send her back in time. I'm just kidding, by the way. The panda lawyer is shaking his head furiously. It did seem very strange. I do think that they paint themselves into a little bit of a corner after T2, because one of the clever things about Terminator 2 is if you've just seen the first Terminator and Arnie was the bad guy and you come in, you assume that what we later learn is the T1000 is actually the Kyle Reese equivalent of the Protector that's come back to protect John Connor. Chatsunami, Adam, and I don't know if you guys had kind of picked up on those kind of like hints that like that's what they were going for. But like when I was watching with my partner, she had zero idea that Arnie would be the good guy in Terminator 2. And so she was so convinced that this guy who was pretending to be a cop was going to be like the Protector and Arnie was the bad guy. And so she like was shocked when like the reveal. And I think it was such a so cleverly done, such a good social commentary and on police and whatnot, that when it got to Terminator 3, you know that Arnie is going to be the good guy. This girl, this female Terminator is like clearly bad news immediately. There's no kind of like, oh, which of the 2 of them are going to be the bad one this time kind of thing. It's like, immediately, and that's sort of you can't lose a little bit of impact from that. And then like it's almost comical how they deal with the female character, where she gets pulled over by a cop and inflates her breasts so that she can kind of like talk her way out of a ticket kind of thing.
But she doesn't need to talk her way out, because she literally kills the guy in like
yeah
10 seconds.
Yeah, I think she kills him anyway. So I thought at the time, I was like, she's inflated her breasts, she's definitely just going to kill this guy. I don't know why they've included this scene.
It was apparently an absolute pain to film as well, because the airbags wouldn't inflate properly.
Oh my god.
I'm just thinking back to like Terminator 1 and 2. Can you imagine if it was like they tried to do a male equivalent?
What, like Arnie's biceps like inflate or
Yeah.
something?
No, I'm
Bulge
like,
just
yeah,
increases.
bulge, yeah. Sarah Connor. Obviously, you wouldn't have that. So, like, why did you have to have? Yeah.
There was so many weird choices that they sexualized this robot with as well, like identifying blood by licking it.
Yeah. Did you see the face she makes?
I made this exact note. Sorry to jump in, but I made this exact note that she makes like an orgasm face when she identifies John Connor's blood. I was like, What? Why would they include that in her programming?
One of the things, I was watching another reviewer for this, and again, he pointed out the same thing, but he said, can you imagine, again, going back to Terminator 1 and 2, but can you imagine if they did the exact same thing? Like, Sarah Connor, yes, that's me who's speaking. Yeah, no, it's just he looks at them and goes, oh! Like, it's just, you're completely right, Greenshield. It's completely unnecessary why they do those things. And I mean, I know obviously there is that hint of, like, you know, showing off the naked Terminators in, like, the first one when they arrive, but they never linger on it, if that makes sense. Like, don't get me wrong, they do it in the third one. I'm gonna, like, backtrack a wee bit, because they do it when Arnie comes in and he goes into the, it's not a strip club, but you know, the bar.
Yes, yeah, the ladies' night.
Ladies' night.
Yeah, and I hate the pan where he like sees like all the women kind of around and then scans to the side and sees the sign that says ladies' night. I was like, oh, that's so cheesy. Like, I get like that's kind of what the franchise is. That's what Arnold Schwarzenegger movies kind of are. There's a lot of that in his movies, but like it did just feel like so different in like its tone, how it's filmed than Terminator 2 was.
It doesn't get any better though as well, because the minute he walks up to the stage and the stripper's on stage and he begins interacting with the stripper, I was like, wow, you can tell this is an early 2000s film. From the way that stripper is portrayed, I was like, woof. This has not aged well in any way.
The very gay-coded stripper.
Flamboyant.
It was very uncomfortable viewing. Should we talk about Arnie in this film? In the first one, as we know, like, he premieres as like a emotionless robot, and he makes such an impact in that role. And even in the second one, although he goes through this journey of finding ironically enough, his humanity as a robot. I mean, that was an interesting thing that they did with that character. In this one, though, they decide that he's gonna be a little bit different. And Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this not like and it is so unnecessary, it's like the T850?
Yeah, it's like a slightly updated version of, as you say, the original T800s that were in Terminator 1 and 2, but it's still an obsolete design since we've got a TX now.
Because we made a joke about this in like the last episode where we talked about our idea for a Netflix show called The Skynet Scientists. And basically what that was was the fact that there must be Skynet scientists working behind the scenes making all of these like terrible decisions. Like what you were saying, Greenshield, about Skynet HR just being like, right, okay, the T800 didn't work. We're going to send the liquidy T1000. Okay, that didn't work. Let's send a female one back into, you know.
But like, okay, but like, I get the robots will want to like improve on the previous model because it didn't work. But like, humanity was pretty fortunate that it didn't work. Like, you could have just sent one back again, or sent two of them, and like they would have won.
Can I just say, I love how like it's made quite clear in the first Terminator film that like Carl Reese makes a point of like the humans are on the brink of winning, and this is like a last desperate move by the machines to try and win by sending the T800 back. You then get a T1000, then there's a TX. It must have been like a fucking conga line of these things like to go right as the humans are like just about to win. It's like, right, go, like they're jumping out of an airplane or something. Like, this is this infinite supply.
Yeah, it's like the war zone of the future.
I'm sure time travel is pretty tricky, but like, does it require so much power that you can only send one at a time? Like, why couldn't they send multiple?
Because I think, and this is probably explained very deeply in the lore, I think it's because two naked cyborgs would feel uncomfortable with one another travelling back in time. So they thought, nah, one at a time. It's like, can you imagine them just making eye contact and being like, nah, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for killing humans, but going into the past naked, that's where I draw the line. And because of Skynet HR, you know, they have to comply with that. So, to be honest, Skynet's own undoing was making an HR department, to be honest. But what are your thoughts about the action in this film? So going to you, Adam, like, what are your thoughts about the action? Because I'm going to be honest, there's quite an interesting scene where there's like a huge chase scene, and granted it goes on for bloody ages, but it's where the TX like controls all of these cars. How that future nonsense works, I don't know. But apparently there's a scene where a crane crashes through a building and they didn't have the money for it, and and Arnie actually took money from his own paycheck. I think it was 1.4 million, or it was a ridiculous amount, but he took that money and he funded that particular scene. I'm going to be honest, I'm just going to jump in right ahead. I do not like the action for this. It feels very like this film when it came out was a 12A, so basically anyone who's 12 years old and up, or anyone under the ages of 12 with adult supervision, they can watch this film. Other than one scene where the TX like puts a hand through like the chest of a guy, which I thought was quite creative, that is the only time you think, Jesus Christ, this is like crazy. Because the rest of it is like a lot of throwing. There's a lot of weird shaky cam. See, whenever something's hit, like there's a lot of weird shaky cam as if the cameraman gets like a fright, like, oh my god. It's just, it's all very PG and very light in comparison to like Terminator 1 and 2 especially. But sorry, Adam, going to you first of all. What did you think of this in comparison?
I would tend to agree with you. I think outside of the chase scene, I agree the chase scene is too long, but I still quite like the chase scene. I still think it's got like some kind of crunchy action to it. So I quite enjoy that, but there's not really much else. I agree. And I think there's a couple of issues for reasons why the action doesn't work as well in this film. And number one, like, I think this is a point obviously where they started to rely much more on CGI, and it's just, some of it looks just bad. The fights between the TX and the T850 are just horrible. They're horrible in every way because they're stupid. The CGI doesn't look good anymore. And I love how this film is determined to let you know how heavy these Terminators are, because anytime they hit anything, they smash through like walls, they smash through floors. The filmmakers want you to know these are heavy things. Like, and I get it, but really it gets ridiculous. And there's a point as well where like, there's one point that had me in hysterics where like the TX like picks Arnie up by like his balls and like just starts walking him through walls. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen, but I thought it was hysterical.
Yeah, even when something's heavy, you still need like some velocity to get through a wall. You don't just walk through it like they did. I did find that a bit silly, and like fell down and just like crashed through these tiles on the floor. I'm like, those tiles must be made of like absolute glass. Like that's terrible.
It's so stupid, especially because like I love like the fight between the T1000 and the T800 in Terminator 2 in the steel mill, because like you can tell these are like machines that are hitting each other, but like it's done in a way that it's not like T1000 throws a T800 and he crashes through like the industrial machinery around, but it's still done so well. But it just went over the top with this. And I think this film, Terminator 3, also it relies too much on trying to replicate some of the action scenes from Terminator 2. And Terminator 2 worked so well because it took the series in a new direction, and it was very fresh and very exciting. The action scenes kind of reflected that, but Terminator 3 tries to like replicate those, especially the scene where Arnie comes out with the coffin on his shoulder and like sort of shooting up the police like cars. It's basically a very poor imitation of the scene from Terminator 2 where he does that. You're just like, I've seen this done better, and it just falls flat. So I think those are the real issues for the action for me. It just doesn't work as well. And I do have to laugh that anytime a human gets thrown by the Terminator, they get like launched like an American football hundreds of yards and like smash into things, but are still okay.
Can we just talk about that? Some of the editing decisions, like as I said before, you've got that thing where not only are the Terminator, see, this is what annoys me, the fact that the Terminators no longer terminate, they throw people like across the room, and it's like, oh my god, you have a metal arm, drive it through their face, there you go, you've won the war, Skynet. But no, they have to, like, as you said, throw them across the room, and whenever they hit people, the camera shakes, it does this weird in and out thing. It's really annoying. But the one thing, it just reminded me, Adam, when you brought up the particular scene, which is actually in the back of the box, I think, for the DVD, where he comes out of there and there's like this weird slow motion as if it's like auditioning to be a K-drama or something. There's just like all of these moments where it's just slow-mo for the sake of slow-mo, if that makes sense. Like, did you notice that, Greenshield?
I didn't notice that as such, no, but I can gather that probably was being overdone based on how they were kind of treating a lot of the cinematography in the movie.
That was a very sort of mid-2000s action film trope. I feel like slow-mo was very prevalent in a lot of those. As you say, there was like, it was pointless slow-mo as well, where it made literally no sense.
It's like between that and Die Another Day, they're like pointless slow-mo. I think they were competing with one another at the time.
It's interesting that, just going back to the action kind of thing, that car chase did go on for a very long time. It caused my partner, she noted that, like, she was like, you know what, I don't think I like the car chase scenes. They go on for too long. And I was like, do you mean like this movie or generally? She's like, this movie, but Also, generally, it was funny. It's funny that you should mention that the car chase scene went on so long, because it's what Taylor had noted as being her getting a bit bored with the movie during that point. She actually really enjoyed the movie. It was her favorite of all the ones we've seen. She did note that John Connor is very cute. I thought that he looked weird personally. I said I said, what, this Seth Green motherfucker?
There is actually a reason for this, and this is something we were talking about before we started recording, but apparently Edward Furlong, who was the original John Connor in Terminator 2, the child actor, he was supposed to reprise his role, but due to, I think it was around 2001, 2002, roughly before they started filming, apparently it was because of alleged substance abuse and everything, and the controversy around that the studio dropped him. So therefore they had to go to Nick Stahl, who, yeah, is just another one of these actors on the revolving door of John Connor actors. I don't know, Adam, see, would you say like there's more Terminator models than actors for John Connor in this franchise?
They're certainly running close in parallel for the number of times that John Connor has been cast as different people. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't really know much about Nick Stahl. I have to admit, like, I don't think I've really ever seen him in anything else. Like, I don't really speak to his general acting ability. I think he's okay in this film. I don't know, like, I think somebody could have done it better. I do think, and I do think he does struggle a little bit, but I don't think it's like, I don't think he stands out as like horrible, like in comparison to Multi. I don't feel he's like, you're like, oh, everything else is great, but oh my god, Nick Stahl. It's difficult to say who is the best John Connor. Like, I think my favorite is like the adult version in Terminator 2. Like, you know, he only appears in like for like a couple of seconds, but he's probably my favorite because he looks.
What? That's an insane comment, Adam.
That's not an insane comment. He looks the coolest. Here's my thing, right? Okay, like John Connor is like almost this mythical. It's supposed to be this mythical figure, and that's what he is in the first Terminator film. And here's the thing about mythical figures: like the more you see them, like the less mythical they become. I almost feel like the Terminator franchise shows too much of John Connor at points. It'd be better, I think, if they just like he was a secondary character. To be honest, I think they get a little bit too obsessed.
You never see him; everyone just references him.
That way, then he can stay mythical. Like the more you see him, the more you're like, oh yeah, I remember when he was like drinking some Budweiser, and then he like crashed his bike. That's not what mythical figures do.
Yeah, I get that. I understand that to a point, that it is one of those things where John Connor is kind of elevated to being this kind of mythical status. You hear about it like from Terminator 1, hearing about how great he is, and then like constantly being told in Terminator 2 that this young John Connor will grow up to be someone who's so important. But then you get to Terminator 3 where he's an adult and you kind of expect him to at least look the part, which he currently doesn't. What I can see what they're trying to go for, that he's still a bit of a dweeb. Like he's kind of like a, that's what I'm looking for.
He's not grown up since Terminator 2.
Yeah, he's a bit of a waste of space, and so he has like a lot of growing to do to become that person, and the start of the war kind of forms him into that person. But yeah, I don't know. I found his character to be quite annoying. I don't think he looked the part. I feel like he looked like a kind of standard early 2000s punk 20-year-old.
I cannot agree more. And going off of your point, Adam, I completely agree with the fact that he is like this mythical, historical figure, because all of us share that common bond as well, that we're all history nuts. And the fact that you learn about like a mythical figure, like someone who is held in such high regard, and the only reason they seem to be using his name is because he's John Connor, and they don't seem as if they know what to do with John Connor. I mean, for God's sake, he gets locked in a bloody kennel cage. The hero of the Resistance of the future gets locked in a dog cage. You're like, really? And then he gets like beaten around, and he's quite moany, I have to say. Like, there's a particular scene where later on in the film he's talking to the T-850 and he's saying, no, we stopped Judgment Day. Like, you know, a child, like, no, we already went to the shops. Of course, Arnie turns around and says, negative, we only postponed Judgment Day, which, again, that's kind of the moment that the whole franchise is doomed, when they're like, oh no, we can churn out as many sequels as we want, we don't care. That's probably kind of a good point before we move on to Terminator Salvation to talk about the actual ending of this film. As I said in the intro, I find this horribly depressing, this film, because they basically commit to the idea that despite Terminator 1 and 2, Judgment Day was always going to happen and there's no way to stop it. And don't get me wrong, they do it in the most stupid way, where they're like, oh, a virus has hit everybody. And they actually have a point in the film where one of the characters, I think it's Catherine's father, says, like, he's the head of, or one of these military generals, and he says going after this virus is like going after a fly with a bazooka, but they still go after it anyway because they're paranoid that this virus is going to mess them up, and then it turns out it's Skynet and everything.
Well, in defense of that, he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he does, you're right.
He doesn't want to use Skynet. I think it's the president that calls in and delivers the final order to initiate it, and he kind of has to agree to do it, and then sees that it's failed.
I actually almost wish the whole film had revolved around Catherine Brewster's father and the decision to, like, launch Skynet. To me, anyway, I find that a more interesting thing, like, if they built that up and you could have some, like, good, like, political commentary and social commentary things in there. But maybe that's just me, but I actually almost would have preferred the film to, like, focus on that.
It would have been interesting for sure. I don't think it would have drawn in the audiences.
That's true, but it would have been very different, in fairness. But
yeah, would have been like some sort of Mancunian candidate, like spy thriller kind of thing.
So you wouldn't get any talk to the hand scenes or anything. I mean, why bother?
You could still put that in there.
Mr. President.
Talk to the hand. And then it reveals the president is Arnie T850 Arnie.
Speaking of, like, Arnie in this particular sequence, because it mostly focuses on the cat and mouse chase between the TX and the T850 and John Connor and everything, but every so often they cut back to Catherine Brewster's father trying to, and I keep calling him that because I don't actually remember his name.
I think it's Robert, I think is his name.
General Brewster.
General Brewster, or that idiot who stood still in a conflict situation while he got shot to death. But anyway, I know.
It was his daughter being impersonated. I guess he was pretty confused.
Yeah, but he has the weirdest look. It's almost as if
he just seen two of his daughter.
He's like, what the hell?
Yeah, no, I think the movie makes a lot of bizarre choices, but I feel like that was probably pretty justified. I would also be looking pretty, like, baffled if two of my daughter arrived.
Yeah, but he gives, like, a Mark Wahlberg the happening face. He's like, what? No! But do you know the deleted scene for this? Like, the reason the T-800s look the way they do?
Sergeant Candy.
That's
Is that
the
what you're
one.
talking about?
Yep, that's the one. Do you know about this, Greenshield?
No, is there like someone who, like, looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the army that they modeled them after?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, the very same. And they don't even give him his Austrian accent. They give him, like, the most southern drawl possible.
There's a great bit in that. So yeah, like, Arnie's talking to this, like, "Hi, I'm Sergeant Candy," like, doing that. And then they're like, "God, can we change the voice?" And then the scientist goes on, "We can change that." And it's like Arnie's voice, like, dubbed over it. I thought it was pretty funny anyway.
It definitely goes, like, with the comedic tone in comparison, but I mean, that's the thing. This film tries to make a lot of comedic moments, and then at the very end, they're like, oh, by the way, all your loved ones are dead, and so are 3 billion people. Judgment Day. Da 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 da.
I identified a bunch of things that I was like, of bizarre choices that the film made. One was when the TX is going around killing all the future military important people. One of the people she kills is a fast food worker. Said fast food worker is wearing his full name on a name tag. Have you ever seen someone at a job who has both their first and last name on a name tag?
That is inviting trouble.
Yeah, that's such a weird thing to do. Like, I've had my first name on things, but, like, you would never have your full name. That's a bizarre choice. I also noticed that when the police came to talk to, quote unquote, Catherine's fiance, who had been killed and was being impersonated by the TX, to tell him about the news about Catherine, they updated him on where the case is currently, like where they think she might be. And it's like, the police would not keep you abreast in that way until they had, like, found and secured, because they don't know for a fact that it's her. So you're not going to be like, oh yeah, we think that she's over by this gas station up the highway. Like, they wouldn't do that. That's such a bizarre choice. And then being like, oh yeah, we'll bring you along to go find her.
Also, you would completely arrest that guy the minute he's, like, open door. He's like, yes, and it's like, your fiance's missing. Oh no! Like, he is screaming out like, I've killed her and buried her in the backyard. Like, you would instantly arrest that guy.
Yeah, another strange choice is later in the movie when the TX like reprograms Arnie to be on her side. She's got like a smirk on her face. This is a robot. Why is it like he, I'm winning?
I noticed that when she's about to die and the look of fear on her face. Like, the robot wouldn't feel that. There's no, like, ability to understand.
No, I get that. In that regard, there's probably a desire to like keep going. Because I mean, the T-1000 in the first movie shows signs of fear and like, and when it goes into the lava, it's like writhing in like agony and pain.
Oh, you know what? Fair point. I retract my statement then. That's all fine.
Next point, John Connor saying to Catherine Brewster at one point when Catherine Brewster picks up a gun and shoots down this like drone, "You remind me of my mother." Knowing that he is later going to marry her is the creepiest thing you could say.
Yeah, there's no justification for that. I remember thinking, what?
If anyone has like mummy issues, though, it's John Connor. It's because I'm like, this guy clearly has fucking mummy issues after all the shit he's been through.
So then John and Catherine get to this like secret bunker place before they know it's a bunker, when they think that they're still going to shut down Skynet. They enter the bunker area and like to check the coast is clear, John just fires a machine gun into the room. And I was like, what are you checking here? What is that going to do? If any like bad things there, it's just going to alert them to you being around there. And like if there are like people there, you might have just shot like people who could help you. So like I thought that was such a weird decision. Maybe you guys think like, oh no, that's a legit thing to do because he was checking to see if there's any booby traps. But like,
I know what you do when you need to check something.
Yeah.
If I go into a room, I like just start firing a gun into the air. I'm like, it's all clear.
It's like that Simpson episode where Homer gets the gun and uses it to like turn off the lights and the TV and stuff. It's like, why are you using this gun to like check around? Like, use your eyes. He fired it just like directly forward. It wasn't like he couldn't just see what was in front of him. And then this isn't a criticism. It was just something that made me laugh a lot, was when initially like the TX crashes a helicopter into the bunker to like chase after them. And then Arnie crashes a second helicopter in there. When the second helicopter came in, like I was just crying with laughter because it's just very funny. For one thing, how did Arnie know where they were? He wasn't abreast to like where this location was.
He'll search his databases. He'll know where Crystal Peak is.
I guess maybe. Yeah, it was so weird, but it was just very funny when one helicopter crashes, then a second helicopter crashes in. I thought that was very funny.
That's like video game logic. Like, you can't actually just safely land a helicopter. It has to like either get shot down or has to crash.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a helicopter land before. I think it's
Wait, helicopters land? What?
in a ball of fire.
So just before we move on to like the next film, is there any closing points that you want to say about this film? Adam Greenshield, this is your chance to either defend or ridicule this film for one last time.
Do you want to go first, Greenshield, or?
Yeah, I'll jump in just quickly. I don't have the same kind of vitriol towards this as Chatsunami and potentially Adam as well. I noted a lot of the things that were wrong with the movie and I didn't like, but I think it's still a fun action film. I think there's still fun to be had there. I saw it coming. I mean, I'd seen the film before. It was a very long time ago, but I saw it coming with the reveal at the end that it wasn't in fact a facility to close down Skynet and it was like a safety bunker. But like, I still thought that was a clever reveal that they did that. And my partner, she reacted like appropriately for that. And she thought, oh my goodness, what, like that's devastating for them. It's very clever kind of thing. And the fact that you could see that there was like a presidential podium kind of thing for the president to give his declaration speech in time of war. I do think that there was quite a few things that make this a fun action movie. It has enough in it that it makes it like a decent like Terminator film. I do think it is the weakest of the trilogy, but it is certainly stronger than those that come after it. And so I don't think it's a terrible movie. I think it is a very watchable, fun action romp. What are your thoughts, Adam?
So I do think it's the weakest of the trilogy, of the original trilogy. I actually like this film quite a lot. Again, it's not perfect. Like there's a lot of flaws in it, but I still really enjoy it, to be honest. I actually have a lot of fun watching this. I actually ended up watching this film twice yesterday, the day before recording. I really do like this film. I think it's a fairly good action film. I think it's a fairly good Terminator film as well. And I have to say, like, I love the ending to this film. I genuinely think it was such a brave decision, and I think it was the right decision, and I think it's great. Like, I love that they committed to that. You know, if this was to have been the end of the Terminator franchise, I think it was actually been a perfect ending. Been perfect just to have rounded it all out. And we ultimately know what what's going to happen. But I think it would have been a lovely kind of perfect sort of little bow on the end of it. But my only big criticism of this film is I almost wish it had leaned far more into just the kind of nihilism and bleakness. I think it's just a little bit tonally, it can be a bit all over the place sometimes. Although I do think there are some actually genuinely funny moments in this. Like, I think Arnie has some great lines, like the one where he picks up John Connor and he's like, "Anger is better than despair," really got a good laugh out of me, than some of the other ones as well. So I do generally like this film. Like, it's not a patch on Terminator 1 or Terminator 2 for me, but yeah, I'm with you, Greenshield. I actually do like this film. I think it's a lot of fun.
And on your point about the ending, I also agree. I think it's a really good transition into what will happen in this world that we don't necessarily need to see, but we know from context of Terminator 1 what happens. Because I think in Terminator 1, it's revealed that humans are about to win.
Yeah.
And so in a desperate attempt, the machines have sent back the T-800 to stop John Connor from being born. And so that context clue suggests that, yes, there will be this apocalypse happening, but we will come out of it and likely win in this kind of cycle. I don't like the end bit with John Connor speaking into the radio. I feel because he's still kind of like muttering under his breath, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm in charge now." That should have been the point, I think, where they should have pushed that this was the guy who was going to lead the resistance, that was like the strong figure. I think they should have done a bit more with John Connor during the film to turn him into, because if this was to be the last film, which we know now it's not, but if this was to be the last film in the series, it's rounded off that John Connor is now this strong figure that can then lead the resistance. And like he goes to the radio and you can barely hear what he says, and he's like muttering, and like I think the guy on the other end's like, who's that, speak up. It's like, yeah, you're not the only one. If he properly stated who he was and like that he's in a position to know how to deal with this threat and like how he will lead everyone, and like you could give like a fun kind of speech, the kind of thing like you see in, we're going to talk about Salvation in a second, but like in Salvation, John Connor gives these like podcasts where he gives these like little brave speeches, these radio broadcasts, and like if he'd given something along those lines in this, then I think it would have been much better. Throwing back to Adam, if you have any opinion on that before we throw it then to Satsu.
I completely agree that, like, I think that was a misstep at the end there. Like, just you saying that about the lines that like Christian Bale does as John Connor in Terminator. Like, if the end line in Terminator 3 had been something like, they're like, who's there? Is like, "I'm John Connor, you're the resistance," would have been such a great line to just end with, and then we don't even need to really worry about the kind of ending monologue. That would have just been the perfect, like, this is the start of the war against Skynet now. So yeah, I completely agree.
No, those are some fantastic points, to be fair. Honestly, my kind of closing point about this film, it's a film that definitely, as you guys said, it's not the worst of the franchise. There's bits that could have been done better, but there's a lot of whiplash in this film. You've got the comedic moments, like, for example, if you took a screenshot of Naked Arnie in that ladies' night scene, and then you just take like a scene of like Manhattan or something getting blown up by a nuclear weapon, you wouldn't connect the two films together. At the same time, I totally agree with what you were saying, Adam. It is good that they did just commit to an ending. They didn't try to say, "Oh, it's another T2 or another T1." But my conflict for this film is just the fact that it does feel almost like they are setting up for like a franchise. It's not like T1 and 2, they had very closed endings where they wrapped a bow and everything, and then for Terminator 3, they're like, "Oh no, Judgment Day is going to happen." So I do agree with you. I think that the nihilism aspect could have been explored a bit more, but at the same time, there are a lot of fun scenes in this. There's a lot of action that, although it maybe goes on for quite a while, at least they have fun with a lot of the actors, with the TX, with the T850. And Greenshield, going on to your point, I totally agree. I think John Connor spends the majority of the film moaning about not wanting Judgment Day to happen for obvious reasons. It's not like saying, "Oh, I don't want ketchup with my fries." It's more like, "I don't want the world to burn." But the way, as you said, it's almost like a school child going up to give a presentation and being like, "Yeah, I'm John Connor. I'm here. Hello." Overall, yeah, this film's not the worst. It's not the best of the trilogy, but it's certainly not the worst. And that segues very well into Terminator Salvation, which was released in 2009, and it is such a meme at this point that I remember when Adam and I went to see these films together. We saw a back-to-back feature where they showed Terminator 1 and then they showed Terminator 2 right after it. And I remember the guy or one of the staff members coming out and making a joke saying, "Oh, welcome to a double billing of Terminator Salvation," and everybody laughed and things. So this film in the franchise is really cemented as one of the worst ones. Looking at the future ones, and we will talk about that in future episodes, but looking at the other ones, I don't think it is the worst in hindsight, but it certainly doesn't make this film any better. Going to you, Adam, what can you tell us about Terminator Salvation? What is this film about?
Okay, well, I'm going to quote the late, great Roger Ebert here in his summary of Terminator Salvation. So are you ready? Terminator Salvation. The story is, guy dies, finds himself resurrected, meets others, fights. That lasts for almost 2 hours. Thank you. I'm here all week.
You know what? That's a perfect summary. I actually can't add any more to that.
I mean, I don't know how I can improve on that, but the general plot of Terminator Salvation is we're now deep in the war between humans and Skynet. John Connor is a prominent soldier in the Resistance, but not quite the leader. And he's a bit of a rogue and a bit of an outsider.
He's a renegade.
He's a renegade, exactly, with a podcast, as Greenshield already pointed out.
I too am a bit of a John Connor.
What, you mean that, like, rousing speech at the end wasn't enough for them in Salvation?
Apparently not. They needed more. So he is trying to basically find Kyle Reese and protect him, because Kyle Reese is his father in a very convoluted way, but that's his goal. At the same time, we're introduced to a character called Marcus, who was a prisoner, who was executed by the state just before Judgment Day happens. But then Marcus is resurrected and questions, who is he, like, why is he here, what happens? He goes searching for answers, and he happens to come across Kyle Reese. Surprise, surprise. We have the story of John and the story of Marcus, and they will intersect at many points as we barrel towards a climax of some sorts.
And what a climax it is, because it is one of the most boring films I think I've ever watched. It's one of these films that has action for the sake of action. It reminds me a wee bit of Man of Steel, where it's just nothing but gritty action. And it feels very generic. I don't know how you guys feel, but it feels very generic. This is genuinely one of my issues, and you're probably going to laugh at this, Greenshield, but I was moaning to Adam about this. So in Terminator 1 and 2, we see glimpses of the future. We see like a very blue, purpley palette. We see all of these skulls everywhere, these machines with treads on them, like hunting through the debris, trying to kill humans, all these lasers firing around. Remember the lasers, because this is going to be very important in a second. Where are the lasers in this film? Where's the futuristic aspect of this? Because the only thing Terminator about this film are the T-600s, the T-800s, the stereotypical Terminator design. There's no lasers, there's no inkling of having like a resistance movement. They're all pretty well organised. They've got helicopters, for Christ's sake. They've got this massive army. So it seems almost as if it is just like the American army against Skynet, which, you know, you have to focus on one part of the world, but it just feels very generic. It doesn't feel futuristic, bar obviously the Terminators and the machines, but Greenshield, do you agree with that?
Yes and no. I do agree on the generic side. I do think it is very cookie cutter sci-fi action kind of movie. And I've seen lots of films very similar to it from around that period. It doesn't really leave a mark so much in that way. But to the point you're saying about it's not future enough and what we see from flashes forward, I guess, in the other movies, what we're seeing those flashes forward is another like 10, 15 years into the future. And so presumably in that time, you then are developing these other robots like the T-1000, the TX. These machines haven't been made at this point in Terminator Salvation. Like Skynet hasn't developed much further along than what they've been able to make with the T-800s. So I can understand why it's not quite as advanced. The most advanced thing that I noticed was the gigantic scavenger robot thing that like grabbed people.
Sorry, you mean the most silent, gigantic Pacific Rim looking?
Yeah, I don't know how it snuck up on them. Like every step of it would shake the ground. So that was very bizarre. And it took like the girl Star, who's mute, was the only one who like realized it was coming.
Yeah, like there's not noticing like a Terminator sneaking up on you versus I as you said, like this gargantuan machine that like hisses and goes, oh, as it snatches you. These people genuinely act like Skyrim NPCs. You know that way when you sneak and you fire an arrow at their face, and then they just go, oh, must have been the wind.
They all had buckets on their head. They weren't able to see this. The child snatcher robot come up and get them.
Child snatcher robot. I like that.
The chitty chitty bang bang robot.
Another robot design. So this is me directly talking to the Skynet scientists here. As I said before, in Terminator 1 and 2, you see these robots that fly around, you see ones that have tank treads, because, you know, you're going to be on battlefields that are very, very uneven, right? You're going to be in ones that you have to roll over, and it is a very brutal image, because, you know, if you think of a tank, they're very brutal and massive hulking war machines and things. It's the same with these ones in Terminator. Apologies for the profanity, skip 5 seconds. But why the fuck do they have motorcycles in the future where there's skulls everywhere? Presumably the infrastructure of the roads are even worse in this film than they are in the future. Like, why do they have motorcycles? What idiot at Skynet was like, we need motorcycles?
My guess is because they're like sleek and fast, but I mean, you could also have like a drone do the same job, so I'm not quite sure why the motorcycles are a thing.
Can I pick up on your point there, Satsu? And I agree with everything you said about the bikes. Why also does Skynet have water snakes?
What was the deal with them, and who also put them in that water as well? How did they get there? Did they wriggle in there? Did someone go drop them into this like presumably like a pond?
I was like, all right, maybe they're there to like find things like the submarine. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But they're all in like shallow water. They're all in like rivers. What are they looking for?
People having a good like summer day, just like frolicking in the water, like, ha, got him.
Do you think someone watched a documentary before they filmed this about, you know how people go in the water and, you know, Amazonian rainforests and things like that, and they have all these horrid creatures just underneath the water? Do you think they watched that and they were like, I want something similar in my film? Well, you want water snakes, you want electric eels, literally electric eels in your film. It's like, yeah, why?
McGee watched both, as you say, like the horrifying Amazonian nature documentary, and he also watched The Great Escape, because watching this film, I could not believe how many references there are to The Great Escape in this film. It was made me laugh how many times things are referenced, scenes are parodied, like, it was just astounding.
The motorcycle jump.
There's the bit where John Connor, like, you know, he strings the wire across and, like, knocks the Terminator motorbike. That's taken from The Great Escape. There's a bit where somebody climbs up a fence to get away and is, like, gunned down. There's so many of them, I couldn't believe it.
I do think, with your point about the motorbikes as well, why did they design the motorbikes in such a way that should a human reprogram it, it could also ride it pretty easily like a regular motorbike? Like what? Like it doesn't need to be built in a way that's rideable.
Should have like a giant spike on a saddle or something.
Yeah, some like an anti-pigeon spikes kind of thing.
Oh, too spiky.
Oh, I can't lead the resistance now. It's uncomfortable.
Speaking of like leading the resistance, can we go back to Christian Bale, who of course plays John Connor, and the fact there is absolutely no need for him in this film? Like we kind of alluded to it when we were talking about Terminator 3 and how John Connor should have been like a secondary character. In this film, he absolutely needed to be a secondary character, but for some reason, it's like one person writing this story and then someone who's written fan fiction of the same property trying to insert their story, because I know there's like behind the scenes stuff of, is it right in saying that Christian Bale wanted like a bigger role in this film and they refused to do it unless he was?
That might be. I don't know that story, but that might be true. Because I think they certainly were at points in production planning for John Connor to be a much more secondary character. So that might explain why he's given much more prominence. I think as well, like the minute you hire like an act, like this, Christian Bale he still is a very big actor, but he was especially a rising star at this point. The minute you hire somebody like that, you're kind of almost backed into a corner of making them sort of front and center.
He doesn't really do anything in this. Like the worst thing, this is probably up there with one of the worst and weirdest scenes in human history, where he wants access, for whatever reason, humanity has like this base in a submarine, which you think, okay, that's kind of makes sense. But then he's like, oh, can you give me permission to come on board? And he's like, no, we can't. And keep in mind, this is a very stormy ocean. And they say, no, you can't come in. And he's like, okay, I'll jump in the goddamn ocean just to go in. And then he gets berated by Michael Ironside, who plays like a general. He does this big thing like, do you know we had to send out like our rescue crews just to get you? How did he survive that? Like, it's bad enough searching the oceans for other things, but searching the ocean for someone in the middle of a storm, it is weird. It's like a very jarring scene when you're sitting there like, really? Is this the leader of the resistance? Like, trying to kill himself constantly? Like, I mean, what did you think, Greenshield?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the scene you're talking about, to be honest. I don't know if I missed that scene.
Do you remember it, Adam?
It's very dark, and I know the scene you're talking about. Like, you might have missed it because it's like near pitch black in the thing, and then like, yeah, as you say, we don't even see John Connor jump into the ocean. Yeah, that's strange. I don't know, like, all the acting in this film doesn't feel great, and I don't think it's all to do with the actors. I think a lot of it's to do with the writing for some of these characters, but as well, like, I don't know, I forgot as well, this was obviously this was the time Sam Worthington was a big star as well.
Oh my god, sorry,
On you go.
Sam Worthington is the same character in every movie he plays. Like, he just plays the like really confused about everything that's happening around him kind of guy. I think I've seen him in 3 things, so I don't have his full sample size, but in Avatar, in this, and in Clash of the Titans, I want to say.
Yeah, he was in that.
He's always just like so confused by everything around him, and he just has a constant like perplexed face going on.
You know what you can add to that list as well? He also voiced Alex Mason in Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2.
Really?
Yeah, so you can add the confused, like, confused thing as well there for the first game. But yeah, I don't want to be mean to Sam Worthington, but I'm kind of with Greenshields. I don't think he's a particularly good actor, and I do have to laugh that his American accent like is constantly dropping out at points throughout the film.
Where's he from?
He's from Australia, I think, or maybe New Zealand. I think it's Australia.
There's so many Australian and New Zealand actors in Hollywood. I didn't realize.
Yeah, no, they're taking over. They're like the Skynet version of, of actors.
They've infiltrated Hollywood.
They have. Oh my god! But yeah, like, I think as well the Marcus character is kind of confusing as well because we're given very little time to like. It's right at the beginning, and we're given very little time to be like, okay, sympathize with this guy, and I'm like, but why? He doesn't seem like a very nice person. It's like, no, sympathize with him. Trust me, it's important later. And then like, yeah, then Helena Bonham Carter shows up for 2 minutes, and I found that first scene very uncomfortable between the two of them. I did not enjoy watching that scene in the prison cell. But then yeah, I did have to like how we had like the credits rolled over this man getting executed. I was like, wow, this is this doesn't feel like a great scene either. Yeah, and then the whole thing of when he comes up and then he turns out he's a robot, and I feel like as well, I feel like they felt at this point it couldn't be a Terminator film unless they had a good robot in there. It felt like it was like, well, we can't not have a good Terminator in the film, where this film would, like, if he had just been a regular human or whatever, like, it would have made no difference. The machine thing, I think, just kind of it just confuses the plot. And I feel like the problem with this film, like, as a film, is I feel like the first half has just so many, like, competing subplots that it's kind of like a bit of a mess. I think it gets a little better towards the end because they kind of shrink down and start to converge. So we've got Marcus trying to find out who he is. We've then got the fact that we find out he's a robot. Like, what's happening there? We've got the secret signal that's going to shut all the Skynet down. We have John Connor looking for Kyle Reese. With Kyle Reese trying to survive in the way. There's so many things happening. It's just like they really needed to just, I think, strip it back a bit and just focus on a couple of things. And I think that would have made for a much like tighter and better experience.
Going back to the has to be a good robot, it's like you have to see both sides of the argument. Both sides need to be represented. Like maybe there's some good robots out there.
Do you know what it reminds me of? And this is slightly off topic, but I'm thinking of like another sci-fi franchise that I keep thinking, what would happen if they had a PR department and how many would quit in day one? So I was thinking back to Star Wars and how, you know, how the Empire takes over and everything. And back in the day when it came out, all they had were the stormtroopers and everything, and they had like Darth Vader. And although a guy in like a creepy mask and everything doesn't give the best impression, you thought, okay, maybe they can like spin that into some kind of propaganda of, oh, we're just doing this to protect you. And then in later iterations of Star Wars, they bring in things called Inquisitors, who are like these, you know, like clothed in dark clothing. They've got like bright red lightsabers, and you're like, being PR people for them is a nightmare. So I can't imagine being like PR for Skynet to be like, oh yes, our Terminators are doing this for humanity. Because I actually looked this up. I looked up why Skynet did what it did, why it wiped out humanity. And apparently it changes per film. Like I think the first two was it was scared of being turned off and it was doing it for the betterment of humanity. And then somebody said, I don't know how true this is, but I'm sure someone said that in Terminator Salvation, they felt guilty or something about taking over humanity, so that's why they were trying to create like hybrids and things, and that's where the whole Marcus thing comes in. The Marcus thing, as you were saying, like the Marcus thing, it's that there's just too much going on. And that's the thing though, because in Terminator 2, and I know I keep going back to Terminator 1 and 2, but in Terminator 2, the fact that the T-800 was trying to explore his humanity was interesting, because you want to know why. Because he was a robot, he had no humanity to begin with, and by the end of it, when he's getting lowered down, he realises like why John Connor was crying, why Linda Hamilton felt the way she did. In this one, it's like, oh, Marcus is trying to find his humanity, and it's like, he's already a human. A bad human at that, but you know, like there was no reason for him going all Wizard of Oz at the end and giving John Connor his heart, you know.
Oh my god, another film it references.
Yeah.
It does the Shawshank Redemption early on, where Marcus like crawls out like covered in mud in the rain and just goes, like, just screaming for some reason. But
The first day I met Marcus, I knew he was a robot.
They can borrow another tagline from the Wizard of Oz. If they only had a brain. That's all I'm saying.
Like, and then to like continue on that point, Skynet's plan with Marcus, at the end where it's revealed like their entire plan was that Marcus would befriend Kyle Reese, have Kyle Reese be taken into Skynet, which would then lure John Connor to come and rescue him, because Marcus would make contact with John Connor as well, and the two of them would sneak in together just so that John Connor could be brought into Skynet headquarters to terminate him. And then at which point Marcus would then go, oh, okay, I'll join Skynet now. What was the logic from Skynet that would be like? At one point I think they said that like they took a risky kind of decision, which is very unusual for Skynet, but it seemed like a lot of risky things and like a lot of things that would need to like pay off for those things to work. And then at the end of that Marcus would decide, yes, I realize I'm a machine, I'm gonna stay with you guys.
Of all the organs that they could have taken out of Marcus, why did they keep his brain? I mean, I know they had like the chip inside, but he could have torn that out easy. Why didn't they just give him a cybernetic brain?
I guess because he needed to think that he was himself and human in order to infiltrate. And so like if they'd made him a robot, then he would have not been able to infiltrate as well.
Skynet loves the drama. That's the way I look at all of this. Skynet wants to do this in the most dramatic way possible. Because the thing that makes the most sense is, okay, the minute that the child snatcher robot gets hold of Kyle and recognizes that it's Kyle, it's holding in its hand, it should just crush him in his hand, and that would Skynet would win, because John Connor wouldn't exist anymore. But because Skynet wants to be dramatic, they had to put this whole plan together. This is clearly like a higher up's like, right, I've made this whole plan, and they're like, oh, but we could just kill Kyle. No, that's just phase 1 of the plan. Okay, we're gonna move to phase 2 after that, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great, guys.
Okay, maybe you guys can explain this to me, because there's like a paradox I feel here where, why does Skynet know at this point that Kyle Reese and John Connor are important? Why are they searching for Kyle Reese and John Connor? John Connor is not the leader of the Resistance. He does the podcast, I guess. He does the radio broadcast to like motivate everyone. So I could guess that might be important. But how would they know that Kyle Reese is significant to him at this point? Because they've not gone back in time.
That is a truly excellent point, Greenshield, because Skynet doesn't know who, in Terminator, they don't know who John's father is. They know who his mother is, but that is an excellent point. There's no, it's a plot hole.
So in Terminator 3, this virus that they end up using Skynet to combat, that was released by the TX, correct? Did the TX start that virus?
Oh, is that what she does with the phone?
I think that's where the virus comes from that they have, that they're protecting. I guess that virus might contain the information or like what she knows to tell Skynet about those kind of things. That's the only way I could think that like how Skynet knows the significance of John Connor and Kyle Reese. It's very bizarre that they would know at that point the significance of them.
I have no answer because it makes no sense.
No, you're right, because they do blow up the human command center, don't they, with the submarine?
Yeah.
Where they launch a huge torpedo into it, and you're like, well, okay, that's humanity destroyed. The head's cut off, haha. But no, they have like this foresight to be like, oh, we know the future, so they become less a thinking binary machine to more, I don't know, fortune tellers at this point. To be like, oh, we calculated this. It's like, there's no way you would pick out John Connor. As you said, he's relatively high up. Like, he's not a commander. He's not the member of like any council or anything. He's just John Connor, captain, commander, whatever rank he is, lieutenant. I don't know, Adam, do you remember?
Oh, general, major, lieutenant, private. Pick anyone.
That one. General pain in the ass, yeah. This film is honestly, it's all over the place. It's one of these films that, and again, going back to what you were saying, Greenshield, about not remembering that scene, there is a lot of moments, I have to admit, where I remember I was watching it and I was like, I don't remember that happening. You know, like with the Terminator motorcycles, with the child catcher robot, with the submarine as well. But I remembered that scene of him jumping in, but it's just so hard to see a lot of things in this film. It is a very dark film. It is hard to see anything.
I actually did remember a fair chunk of this movie. Like the child catching robot, I remembered. I think because it reminded me of like the War of the Worlds kind of thing, which always frightened me as a child. I remember the motorcycles just purely because I remembered the like tripwire thing that he does and how John Connor steals one of them. And like, but there's certain things that I remembered wrong. Like I thought that the CGI Arnie was in it for like longer at the end. I thought it was like a really long fight, but he's in it for like a minute or so, and then they like melt off his like Arnie skin, presumably because the CGI that which just looked awful. It looked like human Shrek from Shrek 2. The CGI was awful, so I assume it cost a lot and it looked bad. So they were like, all right, well, we'll have it melt off pretty quickly. So we'll have a very quick reference. And it's bad because it just further cements the fact like, oh, you didn't actually get Arnie for this movie. Why bother referencing him?
Well, is it correct in saying that after Terminator 3, that's when he ran for the governor?
He was governor at the point of this film was released.
For good reasons, that's why he wasn't in the film. But then again, I could imagine him saying, I don't want to be in this film. And then they're like, what about this money? Yeah, no, he'd still say no.
I think just a little bit more on CGI Arnie there as well. I think what makes it extra bad is that I think actually one good thing about this film, I'd say, is that it actually uses quite a lot of practical effects, which I think is actually quite good and lends like a bit of realism towards it. But it makes CGI Arnie and that whole fight at the end just look extra ridiculous. And for me, it kind of borders into the territory again of like the T-850 and the TX fight. It's just these machines like throwing each other around, like smashing through things. It just looks stupid.
I do think that the T-800s, like walking around, look brilliant. That is done so well. I don't know if they're CG or if they're practical effects or what, but like compare that to like the stop motion that they did for the T-800 in Terminator 1. It looks so sleek. I think that's certainly a positive towards it. It looks really good. I don't know if either of you ever been to Universal Studios and been to the Terminator kind of experience there.
R.I.P.
They shut it down now.
It's gone, yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. That was really fun. The robot in that were very akin to those in Salvation, and so like that's kind of that's how I view the Terminator robots. And so like when I went back and watched Terminator 1, and I was like, oof, they did what they could at the time, but it looks rough kind of thing.
This is me. I prefer the stop motion to the to the smooth motion. That's probably not a popular opinion. That's just my own. But because I find stop motion very frightening, unnerving. So it works.
Yeah, it's only uncanny, I think, is the.
I can see your point though. Like that's a very personal opinion to me. So like I wouldn't blame anybody for sharing your opinion. Yeah, like, and I did like the fact that they included things like the T-600 and stuff, like the ones that have like the rubber skin and stuff, and is that attempt to try and look human but really don't at all. My only problem with that is that like they don't look human, but the thing that gives them away is the giant freaking minigun that they're carrying around that you can see from a distance and be like, that's probably a robot. I don't see many human beings holding a minigun with one hand.
I never played it, but they remind me of the Warhammer 40k. Is that what it is? Warhammer 40k? Yeah, it reminds me of like one of the kind of Marines from that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Most of the effects aren't overly bad. Greenshield, I will agree with you on that. The T-800 Arnie at the very end is a bit rough. Like, no offence to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but the effects like are terrible. So the fact they blasted his face off that probably did the CGI some service. But this film is just all over the place, to be honest. Like, from the action to the effects. As I said before, it doesn't feel like a Terminator film at times, bar having the Terminators in them. Skipping ahead, as we were talking about there with the ending, what did you guys think about the ending? So to kind of fill in everyone else, the ending basically culminates at this Terminator camp. Is that right in saying, Adam? Is it like a... Because I can't actually remember what the Terminators do with the humans. It's like, do they take their skin? Do they make them work on Terminators? Like, what's the deal?
I wasn't clear on that either. Yeah, if Adam's able to clarify that, or that'd be helpful. Because I was like, why are they like farming these humans? Because I was thinking about the Matrix and how they use them for batteries. I'm like, no, that's the Matrix. That's not what they do for Terminator. So I wasn't sure.
I don't know the deep. There's probably like a book or some like deep lore that explains. So I don't know that. But the way I always took it, and going from how the first film describes it, because the way that Kyle Reese describes the future is that in the future that he grew up in, it's like there is no human resistance. Like the machines have basically won, and what they've done is that the humans who haven't been killed in the nuclear war and like the initial sort of takeover have all been like rounded up into these kind of camps. It's basically implied it's very much like a Holocaust type thing where, you know, the camps are there for the extermination of humans, but some are kept alive for things like body. I mean, sorry, this isn't incredibly dark, and do apologize for this, but it's like they're kept alive for things like body removal and some work tasks and things like that, but they're eventually going to be exterminated. And then John Connor kind of is the one who like brings it all together and like creates a resistance and like breaks the humans out of the camps, and that's when the resistance is formed and they begin the proper fight back against the machines. Don't know, it seems like in Salvation this seems like a main kind of major Skynet location, which is like part manufacturing plant, part command center, but also part kind of concentration camp style. And I guess the humans are there to be killed. There's some kind of elements that obviously when they get off the robot and they're going to get like shuffled into the camp to begin with, there's those kind of overtone to it and everything. But I'm not really sure. Like, I don't think the film really wants to go into what's going to happen here and stuff. But like, my guess is it's something like that. It's like an extermination type thing.
I do wonder, like, I noticed there's like those like CAT scan kind of machines at one point. So I wonder if it's like research purposes, so they can like study the humans and like understand them. And so like if they do make robots to like infiltrate the humans, that like they can be more convincing.
Yeah, like that's probably a fair point as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought. It might be also like, I mean, what they used Kyle Reese for was to lure people in and be less likely that the humans would bomb their factory because they know that they might hurt other humans, so they might be using it as like leverage against the humans.
I can't remember if they actually do touch on that in the film, if they're like, oh, it's because of these humans that are there, and this stuffy general's like, we gotta attack now, and you know, John Connor's like, I'm the hero of the resistance, we don't attack now, and you know, it's like back and forth, and you're like, oh, sweet Jesus, just attack it already. And yeah, you end up getting this huge battle scene where all the resistance members and prisoners are running away, and the big showdown between the T-800s and John Connor just gets absolutely annihilated and killed. And as I alluded to before, Marcus gives his heart up for John Connor to live. Now, just before we kind of talk about our final thoughts and our thoughts on the ending, Adam, you had like a very interesting piece of trivia for an alternative ending to this film.
Yeah, so this absolutely fascinated me. I revealed half of the ending before we went on air, but this absolutely blew my mind that this was supposed to be the original ending to Salvation. So here we go. So the original ending was to have John Connor killed, but his image would be kept alive by the Resistance grafting his skin onto Marcus's cybernetic body. Now that is wild. That is wild to begin with. But then Marcus was then supposed to murder Kate Brewster, Kyle Reese, and Star. I don't particularly like the ending to Terminator Salvation now, but that original ending is wild. Like, I don't understand what they're going for.
So that they don't know, they kind of like spread that it's not the real John Connor.
You mean the first bit, why his like his skin is like grafted onto Marcus, which is wild to begin with. Like, that's some like Leatherface, like, you know, shit there. But like, yeah, so I guess to keep the idea of John Connor alive. But then the fact that like Marcus then murders Kate Brewster and Kyle Reese and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, are we killing them because they were like present and they knew that it's not the real John Connor, and so to stop them like telling anyone, they killed them?
I guess, but because John Connor's dead, it doesn't matter now that Kyle Reese dies, because to me it's correct. Like, I don't get, like, I can kind of, the first bit is crazy and wild to me, but I kind of can get it to an extent. It's in that second bit that just, I'm like, was this just like a shock for the sake of being a shock?
If you can kill John Connor and have Marcus replace him and pretend to be him, so long as like the likes of Kyle Reese don't know. So then because then Kyle Reese can still go back believing in John Connor and then give birth to the original John Connor, or impregnate Sarah Connor to give birth to the original John Connor. Like, yeah, if you kill Kyle Reese and that ends, and like Catherine Brewster is then supposed to send Arnie back in Terminator 3 to protect John Connor after John Connor is killed by that same Arnie. But at that point, it could have been Marcus John Connor, and so maybe that's why Catherine wasn't as upset in the situation. They were able to reprogram Arnie instead of just like destroying him.
I don't understand what the hell was going on with that original like ending. Like, as I say, I don't particularly like the endings in the film. It's okay. I don't think it's anything special, but I don't get what they were going for with that. Like, and I don't really like Genesis for the way it kind of messes up, the Terminator timeline. But this one, I think, would have been worse. Like, I don't know what the hell would have gone, after that. So that's wild. Like, Santa, do you have any thought? Do you have anything to like make sense of this, or like any thoughts? Because it just blew my mind reading that.
Well, if you read the Wikipedia page for this, you'll see that there's like a deep and interesting lore answer for this. But yeah, we'll save that for the next episode. No, I have no idea. As horrific as it is, and you gave me into trouble for this, Adam. You were like, you can't put skin over guns and send them back in time. What is this then?
Do you know what? I apologize for giving you crap for that. That seems like a tame, logical take now compared to what I've just read.
I would rather see guns wrapped in meat bags than John Connor's skin like peeled off,
stretched over Marcus's like metallic body.
They're not even similar sizes. Marcus is huge, and John Connor's kind of like slim.
It's so stretched and rotten.
Is it like those Botox faces you see where it's like the skin peeled back?
Oh my god!
Are my beautiful Kate? It's like no, and then the film just ends. Divorce. Anyway,
would you fuck me? I'd fuck me.
Oh no! Oh my god! So we went from the Shawshank Redemption to fucking Silence of the Lambs over here.
Talked about Terminator 3 having a depressing ending, but let's not forget Salvation was going to end with the death of an 8-year-old child.
Well, I mean, Terminator 3 ended with the death of like a billion 8-year-old children, so...
I know, but we didn't see that at the end of the day. We didn't get to know those billion 8-year-old children.
And that's really what was the issue of Terminator 3, that we didn't get to meet those 8 billion children.
Well, that's like I can't believe I'm quoting Joseph Stalin on the podcast, but that's the old, like, the death of one man's a tragedy, the death of millions a statistic.
So moving on to final thoughts.
This is why Terminator and Soviet Russia.
Yeah, Adam, what are your final thoughts on this film before you get us cancelled?
I know, I do apologise for that. Yeah, my thoughts on Salvation as a whole, like, I kind of have similar thoughts on Salvation as I have on the Doom film. That I think if you strip off the kind of Terminator name and the Terminator imagery from this, I think it's like a average to just below average, like, sci-fi action film. Like, it's not great, but I don't think it's terrible, and I think you can have some fun and some enjoyment watching it. But as somebody especially who really loves the first Terminator film, what really annoys me about this film is the way it messes with that. There's no laser guns. It's all just regular guns. This isn't like a resistance movement anymore. This is like a conventional war now, basically, between the humans and the machines. Kyle Reese has moved from being this PTSD kid who's grown up in, like, the most horrific circumstances to almost like a kind of plucky wastelander just getting by in the post-apocalyptic world. We have a T-800 introduced far too early on when it's supposed to be like something right at the end of the war. It's coming far too early in. There's too much in here that irritates me and messes with, especially at a time when we're not into the stage yet where the films were starting to rewrite timeline and everything. This was still very much supposed to be a continuation of that original timeline, so the fact that it's messing with all that stuff annoys me. But yeah, so like, strip off the Terminator imagery, I think it's fine. I think it's fine as a film. Like, I think it's a bit messy, there's a bit too much going on, but it's passable, certainly. But with all the Terminator imagery and lore and what it does, like, it's just the anchor again that just weighs it down, and I don't really care for this film. I really don't care for it.
Yeah, jumping in there I kind of echo the point there. I agree, if it wasn't a Terminator movie and it was just like a sci-fi robot war movie, it would be a 6 or a 7 out of 10, I think. I think probably closer to a 6. Like, it's passable, it's enjoyable enough. I think it's hindered by it needing to be linked to the Terminator franchise, because it then brings it down, because it's then a weak Terminator film rather than being a semi-decent sci-fi film. It's a tricky one because it leaves a sour taste in your mind because it doesn't really fulfill either role particularly well then. What are your impressions then, Satsunami?
Well, seeing this is Adam's favourite film, I don't want to step on too many toes here.
Oh, good for you! I'm going to go Christian Bale on your ass.
You know where I live. That's actually very scary. Please don't. It's a joke. Jokes aside, though, going back to a point that was made earlier there, when you look at this film as a continuation of the original films, I actually don't think, like, it's a good point, I don't think this was meant to be like a reboot. Even though technically there are rebooty elements of it, there's not anything that would, completely disregard 1 to 3. And I actually remember when this film came out, they packaged all 4 films together as a quadrilogy, which I think was actually the first time I ever heard that word. I was like, what the hell is a quadrilogy? And you look at it and you go, oh, a quadrilogy. Like, it seemed weird to include that. I know Simpsons reference, but it is weird to consider this was a continuation and of the same, both universe and of the same caliber as Terminator 1, 2, and begrudgingly is 3. So, yeah, they were trying to, like, cling on to, it's a staple of this franchise, they were trying to cling on to the past. And I think, personally for me, I think this is why they went the direction they did with Genesis and Dark Fate, where they tried to completely reboot the entire franchise. Yeah, we will talk about that next week, to be honest. We are running out of time to talk about Genesis and thingy, but
these movies, 1 to 3, lean very heavily on the time travel element with the sci-fi, whereas Salvation doesn't include that at all. There's the awareness of time travel with the likes of needing to rescue Kyle Reese so that he can travel back in time and be with Sarah Connor. But without that, without Arnie, you are left with a very bland sci-fi story that has been kind of done to death in many ways with regards to like a fighting against either like an alien or robot kind of uprising kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's really what Salvation lacks, that time travel interest. And I've not seen Genesis or Dark Fate. I assume both of those involve time travel. I know that like that doesn't rescue them from what I've heard, that they're both not very good movies, but I think Salvation is very unique and unfortunate in that it's relying entirely on this sci-fi robot war story that isn't particularly interesting, because the time travel aspect is what makes a lot of the Terminator films quite interesting.
I think the main issue, and this will be my final point, don't worry, but I feel as if the issue, the more these films go on, is in the first film, it was a killer machine that completely could not be stopped. As Kyle Reese says in the film, he says it can't be bargained with, it can't be stopped, it can't be destroyed, it can't be killed, and all of that. In Terminator 2, as I've said before, and I know this is a point I always say, but like, it does feel as if that was the time where they did start to pluck these tropes. Because it's such a good film, they plucked certain tropes like, oh, we have to have bigger and badder Terminators, and we have to have this kind of machine-on-machine action. The fact that the T-800 is punching the T-1000, they're having a big brawl, that was cool to see. But when you get to Terminator 3 and you get the TX and everything, you're like, oh god, this is just so dull, and it just seems over the top. And then when you get to Terminator Salvation, it's almost as if they said, right, we're going to have a Blue Peter contest, and all these kids are going to draw their favourite robots, and we're going to try to incorporate it in any way we can. So that's why you've got the motorcycle one, you've got the electric eels, you've got the child catcher robot, you've got all of these like elements that should be a relatively good story, but there's no direction. See, after the original trilogy, like Judgment Day happened. This is something I am going to talk about in future episodes, but the long and short of it is, I think they made a terrible mistake by placing so much emphasis on John Connor as a pivotal character, because at the end of the day, there's a whole world out there being dominated by Skynet. There's a whole vast world, and there's loads of stories they could have brought in, but at the end of the day, they have this like narrow view of, let's focus on John Connor, even though in this film it has nothing to do. And the crux of it is, John Connor's marketable. You could say Sarah Connor, John Connor, Kyle Reese. These are characters that you know. So to throw these into like such a generic action film and say, oh yeah, do you remember these characters? Then you think that's not enough to save this film. And again, I'm going to point this out before we finish up, but this isn't the worst. I don't know. I wouldn't say, after watching Genesis and Dark Fate, this is probably the most boring I would say, like, Adam, would you agree with this in Greenshield as well? But would you agree that this isn't the worst one, I would say, but it's certainly the most boring out of all of them?
That's maybe fair. I mean, I've yet to see Dark Fate, so I will reserve judgment until I've seen that one. But I would probably agree with you that I think Genesis is worse, but slightly more interesting. For like what it's trying to do and some of the decisions it makes. Well, I agree that this is quite a dull film. There's not all that much to really get excited about or get completely angry about, despite the fact that I had a little bit of a nerd rage at the lore changes. I don't think there's all that much to get really worked up about. I mean, ironic since Christian Bale would just freak out, but I would agree with you generally on that point.
Yeah, I agree as well that I've not seen either Genesis or Dark Fate, so I can't say for sure, but like it is the least interesting of those I've seen. It is my least favorite of those that I've seen, but I figured from what I've heard of Dark Fate and Genesis, I probably would enjoy this more than those ones, but again, I can't say that for sure. I do think that there are some things I do like. I know you guys aren't as fond of necessarily all these acting choices, but I quite liked Anton Yelchin as Kyle Reese, and rest in peace, Anton Yelchin. He passed away a number of years ago, but I think his portrayal of Kyle Reese was very interesting. There was a lot of Tom Holland about it, which was quite interesting, and you can kind of see his kind of ingenuity in this film. I feel that like would progress and build to what he becomes as he grows up and is then sent back in time. Which I assume is another like 5 to 10 years from this point. So I do think that was good. Christian Bale as John Connor is okay. I don't think he's bad. I like him, I think, more, to be honest, than I do Nick Stahl. But yeah, and one of my least favorite was Bryce Dallas Howard as Catherine Brewster. I thought she was dreadful. Claire Danes was much better, and I would have preferred if they kept her on, but it would have been weird if only she returned.
She's not given much to do, I think, is the issue with Bryce Dallas Howard as well. Like, that character is really quite underwritten, to be honest.
She's just there, yeah. It feels as if she's just there to be like, oh look, John's married. It's like, okay.
Yeah, like surprise face constantly.
Remember Terminator 3? Remember when Arnie got grabbed by the balls and walked through a wall?
And they had to zoom up on his expression, yeah. Do you know what the worst thing about this is? Like, the fact that we thought that these two films were the worst that the Terminator franchise could ever be. Because this is a thing I personally thought before I entered the age of the reboots with Genesis and Dark Fate. I genuinely thought that the worst Terminators could ever be were Terminator 3 and Salvation. I thought that was the worst it could ever go. Nothing could top that. And unfortunately, we got a fate far darker, pardon the pun.
Da-da-da-da-da.
And yeah, on that note, Greenshield, thank you so much for joining us in both our crusade against the podcast bots and talking about these films again. Yeah, actually, this is the first episode you've been on for season 3, so welcome back to season 3 of Chatsunami.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be back. I love it. And is this the first non-cartoon episode I've been on?
It might
I
actually
think it could be. How exciting. Aren't you thrilled it was for Terminator 3 and Salvation?
Oh, so happy I was chosen for these movies.
You're in the big leagues now.
Next week we're going to be talking about Doom and Doom Eternal. Nah, that's for another episode. But thank you all so much for listening. As always, stay safe, stay awesome, stay hydrated, and prepare for the worst.